thank you. Thank you, thank you. All right, sit down. You're taking my preaching time. Oh, it's great to be here. Ryan, thank you so much for that. Just so encouraged. And man, what great worship tonight, wasn't it? And maybe it's just that maybe I'm getting in on the last night of what you guys have been building, but so strong. Such a sweet presence of God in here. Well, it's good to be here. My first time ever in Southern Pines. Is that right? I've been to Raleigh and Charlotte, but never been to Southern Pines. It's beautiful down here and humid. I don't know if you know that, but dang, it's thick. But man, it's just so good to be here, and just have built such a great friendship with your pastor, and just really, really honestly grateful to be here. We're going to jump into the Word. Before I do that, though, just give a little context. I pastor a church, like you mentioned. We have a movement called Jesus Culture, and then I pastor a church called Jesus Culture in Sacramento, California, that we planted just under 4 years ago, and just had an incredible time. I am married. I've been married for 20 years to the same woman right there. There it is. Been married for 20 years. I have a 19-year-old daughter in college. I have a 15-year-old daughter in high school, and then I have a boy that's just about to turn 13 in middle school, and so we're at that stage of life. I don't know if those that are older in the room, as myself and above, you'll kind of get this a little bit, but the older I get, the more I am realizing I start saying phrases like back in my day. And this just happened because last year was a big year for us with our family because all of our kids jumped up. So my daughter graduated from high school, went to college. My middle kid, she graduated from middle school and went to high school. And then my son went from elementary to middle school. And so everybody kind of jumped. But it was so random because, again, I don't know if it's like this here, but in California, they've just started making graduations for what feels like every grade. And it's a little bit stupid. It's like pre-K little graduation, kindergarten graduation, and there's middle school and high school. But now, I kid you not, my son had a full graduation ceremony to go from 5th to 6th grade. And it's a Christian school. They asked me to be the keynote speaker for it. So it was so random because I'm at this like 5th grade graduation thinking like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. This is so stupid. Why are we here right now? And what am I going to tell 5th graders? Like you've had a long journey and you've worked hard and you're about to go into 6th grade. And so I find myself now going back in my day, we just went from 5th to 6th grade. We didn't need graduations. We didn't need graduations to go to the next class. And that's what I'm finding, everything that's happening. I'm like, so that's the sign of old age, I guess. Can anybody, I don't know, maybe not, but as I look back more, so. But they are home right now. My son was at a basketball camp all this week, and my wife just texted me. His team won the championship at their basketball camp. That's right. And I will let him know that's good because Liebschers are winners, not losers. And so if you have your Bibles, get them out. We're going to go to Exodus 2. And then we're going to go to Exodus chapter 4. Exodus chapter 2 and then Exodus chapter 4. I want to talk to you about revival tonight, but I want to come from a little bit of a different angle. I'm a diehard local church guy. I have been since I grew up in the church, but when I really gave my life to Jesus at 17 and went all in, I have been deeply committed. I am the guy that shows up early on the front row because the front row people are more spiritual. It gets less spiritual the further back. But anyways, but my wife would disagree with me on that statement, but that's not the point. I'm there. In high school, I was at all this stuff. I've just always been involved in church and have a real deep passion for church, pastor at church. I'm a diehard local church guy. I very much believe in the role of the local church and in the role in the individual life of a believer, the role of the local church in a city. But I think if you were to cut me at my core and really ask what I'm about, at my core, I'm about revival. I want to see revival. I want to see a move of the Spirit of God that awakens the church to a greater passion for Jesus and his cause in the earth, where we're going to see the lost saved and culture transformed. This is what marked by the power and presence of God. This is what I want to see. But I really believe that in order to see that, the Lord has to shift our perspective on how we see the church. I really believe that he wants to kind of just change our angle on how we see the local church and how we perceive the local church. Again, if the goal is revival, if the goal is a move of the Spirit of God marked by His power and His presence that really does awaken cities and nations to Him, then the local church, I believe, is the vehicle for which that flows. It's the vehicle by which God comes in a really profound way, but therefore it matters then that we see the local church properly, that we see it correctly. And I really believe that he's shifting it's not a drastic shift, but it's a big one. And I don't know if you ever tried to make something out before and you couldn't really you couldn't get clarity on it until all of a sudden you just shifted your perspective slightly. When you changed your perspective slightly, you could see it clearly. I think that's what the Lord wants to do around this issue. And let me read this to you. We're going to read, ultimately tonight, we're going to read just two passages, a verse and then a passage from Ephesians. But we're going to start in Ephesians 2, verse 19. Now, therefore, you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God. You read it again. This is that when you got saved, you went from darkness to light, and you came out of not belonging to being redeemed, being saved into a household. This is a phrase we're going to go to. Now, therefore, you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God. Where I believe God wants to shift our perspective on the local church is around this issue, that the church is a family, not a business. Now, I think that we would all agree with that. Innately, we would understand that, yes, the church is a family, that this is what we long for, but I'm not really sure we follow that thread all the way through to what that actually means and what's required for my life. Ultimately, this has always been God's plan. God's plan has always been to redeem a people unto Himself that would then, as a family, represent who He is as a father in the earth. That as sons and daughters, we would represent the very nature and character of God. He did not send His Son to die on a cross to redeem employees. And listen, I know there's a lot of analogies about the church, and I believe that the church is an army. And I believe that, but I think that the primary analogy of the church is a family. And that if you really read Paul's writings, it is family language he's using. I'm going to show this to you. But he said, you belong to a household. You've been redeemed you're no longer foreigners. You're no longer strangers. You now belong to a household of God. In that family, God came to redeem sons and daughters unto Himself as a father. And then as sons and daughters, as family, we're to represent the very nature and character of God to the world around us. It's always been as a family that His character is revealed. People many times will ask, like, well, why do you do what you do, or why do you act like you act? It's all because I see my father doing this, and this is who we are. Years ago, my friend Luke, he had his kid was probably 3 years old, maybe, and my friend's a pretty big guy, 6'4", probably 250 at the time, and he was watching his son one time. He was 3 years old, and when his son got up, his son would make like this little grunting noise. He'd be like, eh. And he was watching his son, and he's like, why is he doing that? So we watched him for a few days, and every time his son would get up, he'd grunt. And one day, my friend who'd been sitting there for an hour watching TV or whatever, he gets out of his chair, and when he gets out of his chair, he does that kind of old man stretch grunt thing. You know what I'm talking? He got up, he's like, ugh! And right as he did it, he realized, oh my gosh, that's me. That's me. Like his 3-year-old son had just been watching his dad, and it's like, I guess men grunt when they stand up. That's what men do. And so his little 3-year-old son, every time he got up, he'd be like, eh. Because I'm watching my dad, and I guess that's what we do. We grunt when we stand up, men. And this is it for us. When people look and say, well, why are you so forgiving? Why do you love? Why are you kind? It's honestly because, I don't know, I've been watching my dad, and he's really kind, and he's really loving, and he's really forgiving. Therefore, that's who we are. Why are we so generous? Why are we generous? Well, I've been watching him, and he's really generous. So I guess that's who we are as a family. We're generous, and we're to represent, or we're to reveal the heart of the Father to the world around us. But that happens within the context of a family that's operating. Sons and daughters. And it is extremely important, again, if we're going to get to revival, which is where we're going, right? If we're going to get to revival, it's extremely, and the local church is the vehicle through which that comes. That it's really important we see the local church properly. Because how you see something determines how you interact with it. So how I see something determines for me how I am going to interact and engage with it. Therefore, I've got to see it properly if I'm going to engage and interact with it properly. If I see it improperly, I'm going to engage in a wrong way with it. Many people in the church are frustrated, are confused, simply because they're trying to interact with a church in a way that God didn't design it, and they're running into walls with it because they see the church wrong. Their perception is wrong of the church. How I see something determines then how I'm going to interact with it. I'm a big customer service guy. I don't know why. I just like good customer service. It may be an American thing for me. I don't know. Has anybody traveled to Europe at all? If you go to anybody from England? Okay, I'm going to offend a whole nation. Forgive me for this, but England's the worst at customer service. We go there every year, multiple times. Like we have a work in England. We got a church out there, and we're in England all the time. And I mean, they're the worst. You literally feel like you're an inconvenience for being there in their restaurant, giving them your money. Like it's that type of thing. Like, am I inconveniencing you right now? And so it may just be that I feel this is my God-given American right to have good customer service. But I want good customer service. And I'm not the guy who throws a fit if I don't get it. I just remember. So if I go to a restaurant, and I walk into that restaurant and they sit me down and it takes 10 or 15 minutes before somebody comes over to check on me, give me some water, some bread, I don't get mad. I don't talk to the manager. I just remember and don't come back. If I specifically ask them, please don't put any tomatoes in this dish, because I can biblically prove from the book of Revelation that tomatoes are tied into the Antichrist. Does anybody else believe that with me in here that you're, yes, okay, a handful of you. So if I say, please don't put tomatoes in my dish, and they bring tomatoes out, again, I don't get upset, I don't get mad. I push them off to the side, but I just don't come back. Because I want good customer service, because I'm at a restaurant, that's what I'm expecting. The problem is when if I viewed my house in the same way, it becomes problematic. So I'm approaching a restaurant, and I know it's a restaurant, therefore I'm interacting and engaging with it in a certain way. But if I come to my house and engage and interact with it the same way, it's extremely problematic. Can you imagine if I come into my house? Let me just say right now, first of all, I'm too scared of my wife to do this. But I have a godly fear of that woman. But can you imagine if I walked into my house, sat down at my table, and then sat there for 10 minutes wondering when somebody was going to check on me and bring me some water? And about 10 minutes in, I'm like, excuse me, is anybody going to bring me some water? From all over the house, like, no, get your own water. No, can you imagine? I'm like, I cannot believe this. I am never going to come back here again. I'll take my business elsewhere. Can you imagine if my wife, again, I'm too scared of her, but can you imagine if she brought a dish out that had tomatoes? And I'm like, I have specifically asked for no tomatoes in my meal. I am going to take it doesn't work, right? It's like we laugh, it's problematic in nature if I approach my house as if it's a restaurant, because it's not a restaurant, it's a house. It's a house. It's not a restaurant. And so all of a sudden, it shifts then how I'm going to interact with this. If I see it as a house, a place where family comes, a place where people engage and jump in and get involved, then that's how I interact with it. If I see it as a restaurant, I'm not coming into the restaurant thinking it's my house. This is why I very much am trying to, when you plant a church, you're looking for culture You're wanting to establish a culture, and much of culture is established through common language and stories and analogies. So we started saying early on, because we're like, listen, church is a family, it's not a restaurant, and therefore we want it to be like Thanksgiving. We want every time we gather to be like Thanksgiving. And this was the storytelling. And the reason we would say Thanksgiving is because Thanksgiving has become my favorite holiday. Now, it wasn't always my favorite holiday, because I grew up in a home that was like all of my extended family. I don't know if anybody else in here like this. I didn't really know any of my extended family. They were all extremely messed up and dysfunctional and kind of disowned us. So holidays was me, my sister, my mom, and my dad. That's it. And so we would, we'd sit down on Thanksgiving, and it'd be us four at the table, and we'd have our meal. And Christmas was always this kind of like, we'd sit down at Christmas, and this is how Christmas would go. If you come from a small family, you might get this. But, like mom would open her gift, and we'd sit there and we'd look at her gift and talk about her gift and check it out and write thank you notes for it. And then we'd go on to my dad and we'd look at his gift and talk about his gift. And then it was always this process. And then I married my wife, and married into a family that could not have been more opposite from my family. First of all, and again, this isn't I don't say this is negative. We love all of her. Her family has multiple marriages from her parents, and so there's half and step, and we love all of them, but there's a lot of them, and cousins, and then there's grandparents that are very involved. So I remember the first time getting involved in her family, it was like culture shock. I went to her Christmas for the first time, and I walk into her Christmas, and there's 40 people in the living room. And I was like, who are all these people? They're like, well, it's my family. Really? Wow, okay. And so we're kind of there, and I'm not making this up. I'm trying to get to know some of them, and I'm like, hey, who's that guy? She goes, oh, that's my brother Dave. And I said, oh, your brother Dave, okay, like, is that your dad's side, or maybe your stepmom's side, or like, whose side is brother Dave? And she totally said, well, neither. I'm 19 having this conversation. I said, well, how is he your brother then? And I'm not kidding. She goes, I don't know. He just started showing up in high school. He just kind of started showing up in high school, and we started calling him brother, and he's come ever since. And I'm like, that's not even legal. You can't do that. What? And then we start opening gifts, We start opening gifts, and they give me, I'm like, thank you for that. And I start opening, I look around, there's 10 other people opening their gifts at the same time as me. And I'm like, whoa, hold on. I haven't finished opening my gift. We haven't talked about it, written thank you notes for it. You can't open your gift same time. I'm like, I literally married into a family of anarchists. But because of this thing, Thanksgiving has become my favorite holiday. It really has. Like, it's because Thanksgiving, all of the cousins and the aunts and the uncles and the nieces and the nephews and the grandparents and the parents, we all come together, the brothers and the sisters, and we all come together, and we spend the day together, and we watch TV, we watch football, we hang out. But whenever we get together, everybody jumps in and just contributes, right? Because it's family. And so I'm 19 years old showing up for the first time, and I am not making this up. I walk in, and they hand me a bag of sweet potatoes and potatoes and a potato peeler. And I was like, I guess I'm peeling potatoes. So I peel potatoes. Next year I come. They hand me a bag of sweet potatoes, and a potato peeler. I guess I'm peeling potatoes. I'm 42 years old. I'm a grown man. I am a senior pastor of a church. I have written books. Do you know what I did at Thanksgiving? I peel potatoes now. That's what I do. That is what I do. And after 20 some odd years, I've gotten pretty good at it. In fact, listen, I bring my own potato peeler now. I kid you not. I got somebody bought me one from Japan, like from Japan. It's this whole one I bring in. I'm thinking about making a holster for it next year. And I peel potatoes. And I love it, right? I love it. And the reason why I love it is because, like I don't have a passion for potatoes. I don't have a vision for potatoes. I don't have a mandate on my life for potatoes. I may not, but I don't have a passion, but I do have a passion for family. And so I'm like, I don't care, I'll peel potatoes. It's the people that I'm hanging out with and doing it with, and that we're all contributing to make this the best ever. That's why I love peeling potatoes. It's great. That's why I'll bring my own potato peeler. Because when I come on Thanksgiving, it's family I'm coming into, not a restaurant. Right? I don't go into a restaurant and go, hey, I noticed you had mashed potatoes on here. You need any help in the back? I brought my potato peeler. Can I get back there and help? Like it's a restaurant. It's crazy. It shifts everything when you can begin to see the church as a family. And the crazy thing is we don't even know that we don't see it that way. We want it. We long for it. We just don't know we actually don't see it that way. There's little tiny things. Like, did you know that the favorite dish at Thanksgiving is this sweet potato casserole? Granny is 96. She doesn't make it anymore, but it comes from her. And she's passed it now down, and they make it. It's sweet potato casserole. And everybody loves it. It's that dish that you start the line at, because if you don't start the line there, you may not get it. So you just start there, get that first and get the rest. So it's that dish. And here's what's crazy. Nobody thanks me for what I did. Now, in my head, this is the conversation I have in my head. Somebody will be eating the sweet potato casserole. This all happens in my head. I'm like, you enjoying that? Yeah? Yeah, you're welcome. Those sweet potatoes did not peel themselves. You liking that dish? Yeah. But nobody thanks me for peeling potatoes and peeling sweet potatoes, and it doesn't matter, right? Who cares? I don't care if you thank me or not. I'm here to make this the best Thanksgiving we've ever had as a family, and we're jumping and contributing. It's a shift that has to begin to happen. That I have to be, and we don't even realize that we're not doing it, that we're approaching the church as something other than a family. I'm going to challenge you on this thing because Paul's language, when he's talking about the church and when he's talking about leadership, is a family language. It's throughout his writings. Listen to this really quickly because I want to read to you what we would all know, which is the fivefold ministry description. The fivefold. This is the church leadership structure that was put in place for us. The Bible actually says they're gifts that have been given to us. But listen to the language that he uses around this, and we begin to find out what the purpose of the church actually is and what the purpose of leadership is. Listen to Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians 4, 11 through 15. And he himself, just talking about Jesus, gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors and teachers. Here's why. For the equipping of the saints, for the work of the ministry, or what I would call the normal Christian life, for the edifying, the encouraging of the body of Christ, till we all come to the unity of the faith of the knowledge of the Son of God, to a perfect man, many translations says, to a mature man, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. Let me just stop there because I'm going to come back to this. I don't want to dig too deep into this. But he's talking about the concept of sanctification. So justification is a legal transaction that happens. That when I get saved, I become justified. Justification happens. And it is a one-time deal. I am now justified in right standing before the Father because of what Jesus did on the cross. Because of the blood of Jesus, I'm justified. Justification. Sanctification is the working of the Holy Spirit in my life where day in, day out, where daily the Spirit of God is renewing and transforming me to be transformed into the image of Christ, to look like Jesus. The journey of the Christian life is a sanctification journey where day in, day out, I'm looking more and more like Jesus. This is why the fruit of the Spirit, when you talk about the work of the Holy Spirit in your life, which is to sanctify you, that the fruit of the Spirit, when you go through the list of the fruit of the Spirit, you know what it's describing? Jesus. Go read it's describing Jesus. So when the fruit of the Spirit begins to manifest in my life because of the working of the Holy Spirit, then that is, I am beginning to look like Jesus. That's the work. So he's talking about this, right? This is what he's referring to. You can see this. So he says, to a mature man, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. And listen to this language. that we should no longer be children, tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the trickery of men and the cunning craftiness of deceitful plotting, but speaking the truth in love may grow up in all things into him who is the head, Christ. Look at this. He himself gave the fivefold to equip you for the normal Christian life, to encourage you so that you will become a mature man, no longer children, and so that you would grow up. You know what the end game is? Maturity. This is what God is after in your life. He is after maturity in your life. That your life would be maturing, growing, looking more like Jesus every day. It is maturity that he is going after. He has given us the fivefold so that we would mature and grow. Here's the deal. When you see the church as something other than family, it radically stunts your growth. Because it is family that has the natural flow of maturity, and it is family that thinks maturity. The natural flow of family is that fathers and mothers have sons and daughters who grow and mature and become healthy until they become fathers and mothers who have sons and daughters who grow and mature until they become fathers and mothers who have sons and daughters. This is the natural flow of family. Just the most natural thing in the world for families to be looking at the people around them and looking for growth and health in them. As a parent, this is my job, to make sure that my kids are maturing and growing in every area of their life and becoming healthy and whole. So my job is not to raise sons and daughters. My job is to raise fathers and mothers, right? The goal of the church is not to raise sons and daughters, it's to raise fathers and mothers, because that's what family does. But if I approach the church as something else, maturity is not the goal. Maturity is not the flow. It's very interesting because people sometimes, if my son stopped growing, it would be cause, we'd be greatly concerned. If he stopped growing, and I'd be wondering what's going on, and my wife would be concerned, and my parents would be concerned, and his sisters would be concerned, and his aunts and uncles would be concerned. And we'd be like, and I said, I don't know what's going on. He's not growing right now. I'm going to take him to the doctor. I take him to the doctor. I don't know what's going on. He's not growing. We'd all be very concerned about this because we care about his growth. And if he stops growing, it's not normal, and so it's cause for alarm, and we take him to the doctor. It is amazing to me how many people come into the church, though, and they're so surprised or thrown off when somebody's in their life. Y'all quiet. But it's like, this should be the most normal thing in the world. What's your name? Zach. It should be the most normal thing in the world. Like, Zach, what's going on? What do you mean? You haven't grown in 6 months. I'm not saying this prophetically, but you haven't grown in 6 months. You don't look like Jesus. You don't look more like Jesus today than you did 6 months ago. Like, what's going on? And people are like, whoa, back up, man. Get out of my business. What are you, what? Whoa, why you gotta be all up in my face? I don't know, that's family, right? This is what we do. This is the church is a family. And the church then creates a culture that maturity is required. Now, here's why this matters when it comes to revival. Here's why this matters when it comes to reaching a city for Jesus. Because one of the problems is if we create an environment, or if we approach churches, if it's anything else in a family, if it's a business or whatever else, maturity is not the ultimate goal then. And here's the thing. There's a couple key markers of maturity. You know what one of the main markers of maturity is? And I think maybe the main prophetic word the Lord wants to speak over the American church, it's these two words: personal responsibility. Personal responsibility. One of the main markers of maturity is when people begin to take personal responsibility for their life. Again, if you've raised kids, you know this. Kids don't want that. Personal responsibility is not in their radar. It's not in their vocabulary early on. But as they begin to get older, you can see a sign of maturity is that they're beginning to take personal responsibility for their life. It's a sign of maturity. Guys, listen, you'd be surprised how many people approach the church and they're looking for somebody else to take responsibility for their Christian life. They want somebody else to build something to accomplish what God's called them to accomplish. You guys are all out here on a Thursday night, so it's your own fault for being here. Here's what happens. When you got saved, you became a follower of Jesus. So I'm now a follower of Jesus. And as a follower of Jesus, there's certain things he asks of me. Pray. Pray for the sick. Be generous. Take care of the poor. Take care of the widows. Share your faith. Disciple people. Get in community. These are all things he asks of us. This is not like the super spiritual. This is just a normal Christian life. And what happens is many times Jesus has asked us to do something, and we come into the church, and we're looking for the fivefold, not to equip us, not to mature us, but to do for us our Christian life. I mentioned my wife and I grew up very different. And my dad was a police officer, and our life was really ordered. So in our ordered life, we didn't have, pets didn't really have a place. And then I married my wife, and I am not kidding you right now. I married a full-blown zookeeper. It is insane. I have bunnies and baby bunnies in my garage, and she hatches chicken. We don't even have a farm. She hatches chickens in our garage, and they have bunnies, and we have cats and dogs and frogs and birds and hamsters. It's crazy. But what she really loves is dogs, and we got this one dog. It's an English golden retriever named Dash. She loves Dash, loves Dash. Loves Dash. I think if I said, CJ, you got to choose between me or Dash, I know she would choose me because we made a covenant before God together. I just think it would take her a moment. She'd have to kind of think about it for a second. But when we first got Dash, he's a normal puppy, just chewed everything. Every shoe and sandal, every sandal, chewed through a wall, chewed all the carpet up, dug the entire backyard up, ran every time the door opened, wouldn't walk on a leash, just choked himself the entire time. And so finally, I'm like, CJ, we got to get this dog trained. I can't do this anymore. So he's like a year old or something. And I saw at PetSmart. Do they have PetSmart out here? I saw at PetSmart they had a group dog training class. So I'm like, all right, I'm taking it. It was like $180 for 10 classes or something. Done. I write him a check. I give it to him. First day of class. I walk in, and I'm already embarrassed because Dash is choking himself as we're walking in, the whole way in. And I'm like, hey, how's it going? Hey. All right, hey. And then we sit down in class, and he's just coughing because he just choked himself the whole way in. And I sit down in class, and all of a sudden, this dog trainer comes out, and she starts the class. And as she starts the class, I notice that she's not talking to my dog, she's talking to me. I honestly thought, that's a little weird, okay. All right, so I listened for a little bit. And she kept talking to me, not the dog. And I'm like, I don't know why you're talking to me. I'm not the problem. I'm not the problem. Talk to my dog. Well, I thought, all right, it's an introductory first class. I come back the next week. She kept talking to me. And I'm literally like, lady, listen to me. I need you to fix my dog. Fix my dog. I paid you money so you would fix my dog. He needs to walk on a leash. He needs to stop digging. He needs to stop chewing everything in sight. Fix my dog. And what I very quickly found out is that dog trainers don't train dogs. They train people. I was irritated. I was mad. I didn't go back. I stopped going back. Because I'm like, I'm here for you to train my dog. Welcome to the church. Right? I've got a Christian life that's my responsibility, and I come into the church and I'm like, all right, what is it that you're doing? What is it that you've built to accomplish my Christian life? What is it that you've done? And listen, it's amazing to me. We planted a church 3.5 years ago, and a lot of people came. And they're not all unbelievers. People came, different churches, and all this stuff. And I just got a front row seat to the culture of church at some level because we're still a simple church. We have a pretty simple model, but we didn't have anything early on. We did Sundays. That's about it. So people would be coming, and they'd be like, hey, how do I get plugged in around here? How do I get plugged in? And we didn't have a small group structure. I didn't have anything. So I'm like, I don't know, invite people over to your house for dinner. And they were like, what? No. Like, what's your small group structure? What's your small group structure? How do I get plugged in? I'm like, I don't have one. I don't know. Take somebody to Starbucks. And it was so amazing to me that I'm like, are you telling me you don't know how to get in community unless I build something? Is that what's happening? And I'm not trying to be harsh. I'm just like, is that where our level of maturity has gone? Where if somebody doesn't build something, I can't get into community, which is what Jesus asked me to do? We've stunted our growth because we haven't required maturity in people. Listen, I like programs. We've got small group structures. We've got programs. But if I go to a church and there's no small group structure, hey, Jesus tells me I'm supposed to get involved in people's lives. So I'm like, hey, what are you doing? Come on, let's get together. Hey, you go, let's get together. Come on. And we're all gathering together because we're called to do life on life with people, whether somebody builds that structure for me or not. I mean, people might come up and be like, hey, my neighbor just got saved. Where's your new believers class? And I'm like, in your living room. Guess who the leader is? I anoint you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit to go and lead your... Because I'm not saying this harshly, but it's not my job to disciple your neighbor. It's not. It's my job. I'm called to disciple not because I'm a pastor, but because I'm a believer, because I'm a follower of Jesus. But when it comes to the leadership, the fivefold, it's that my job is to make sure you're equipped, encouraged to be an effective discipler, not to do it for you. And we don't even realize that people will come up all the time and be like, hey, so what's our church doing for the poor? I don't know what you're doing for the poor. I don't know. I don't know what everybody here is doing for the poor. Guys, this is why we've got to, because what happens in family is there's a maturity that's required that says this. If my church never has a program for the poor, which I have a grid for and have a value for, right? But if my church never has a program for the poor, do I still lean in and say, Jesus, you've asked me to take care of the poor. What am I to do to take care of the poor in my city? Personal responsibility is a sign of maturity. It's one of the reasons, I'm telling you, it's one of the reasons why we're not reaching cities yet, is because much of the church has taken the responsibility that Jesus has given them and put it on somebody else. We think somebody somewhere is going to reach this city, right? Somebody somewhere is praying. I'm going to tell you stupid stories tonight, but when I was in college, I went to school in Southern California, right by Disneyland, and then it's a 10-hour drive up one freeway to where I lived in Redding. And one day we're driving home from college, 10-hour drive, and we're with my friend. He's in Pete's truck. It was my friend Pete, I was in the middle, and my friend Steve was in the passenger seat. But we're about an hour and a half away from my city, and we pull over to get gas, and we pull up to the gas pump, and get out, and Pete goes in and pays for the gas. Steve goes and gets some snacks. I go use the restroom. We finish up there, get back in the truck, and we drive away. About 15 minutes down the road, all of a sudden the truck just lurches to a stop, kind of coast over to the side. We're like, Pete, what's going on with your truck? He goes, I don't know, guys. It's never broken down before. I don't know what's wrong. And we're like kind of looking at the oil gauge and heat gauge. It's all good. And then I look at the gas gauge, and it's on empty. And I said, Pete, did you put gas in the truck at the gas station? He says, no, I went in and paid for it. I thought Steve was putting it in. And we both look at Steve, and we're like, Steve, did you put gas in the truck at the gas station? He goes, no, guys, I was getting snacks. I thought Banning was putting gas in. I'm like, don't look at me, guys. I was in the restroom. I thought Pete was putting it in. We had driven up to the gas station, pulled up to the gas pump, paid for the gas, got snacks, went to the bathroom, got in the car, drove off, and never put gas in. I'm telling you, part of why maturity has to begin to happen, and part of why family needs to require this, because this is some of what's happened. Like, somebody's praying for our city, right? Like, somebody's praying for our city, right? I'm just, because I'm not. I wasn't praying. I thought you were praying. I'm not praying. I thought that guy over there with the Christian t-shirt was praying. Somebody, what do we pay our pastor for? Or is this not what we pay our pastor for? What does he do all week long if he's not doing my Christian life for me? Like, what's going on here? it's like, hey, somebody's taking care of the poor, right? I think so. I don't know. I think our pastor was talking about something he was putting on. I think he's taking care of the poor. I think somebody's taking care of the poor, right? Somebody's taking care of widows, right? And somebody's trying to actually reach out and share their faith. Like somebody's doing that, right? Because I was in getting snacks. And the church literally thinks everybody else is doing it, and then they drive off and never do the very thing that we're supposed to do. It's not. See, one of the things that begins to happen with personal responsibility, and one of the reasons why when you approach church as a family, you begin to realize, oh, maturity is what's required from me. And when personal responsibility begins to impact my life, one of the things you find is you go from being an externally driven believer to an internally driven believer. This is one of the big ones. And we don't even realize it, but we are an externally driven society. We're an externally driven society. It's like, I drive the speed limit because of an external thing. I get good grades because of an external thing. I work hard because of an external issue. We're an externally driven people. But the problem is that we're new covenant believers. And the main difference between the old covenant, the law, and the new covenant grace is the old covenant is an externally motivated covenant. Which means this. It comes and says, what's your name? Kelly. It says, in the old covenant it would say, Kelly, obey your parents. She's like, what if I don't want to? Then we will stone you. Literally, then we'll kill you if you don't. Okay, I'm going to obey my parents. It's an externally motivated concept. The new covenant of grace is an internally motivated concept. It's why if anybody ever says that grace is a higher standard than the law, because the law dealt with external issues. The law says don't murder, don't commit the act of murder, don't commit the act of adultery. The new covenant is a higher standard because grace says, Jesus came and said, hey, don't hate unless it's murder. Don't lust unless it's adultery. He's dealing with an internal reality. But the reason why the new covenant can require that is because the new covenant has what the old covenant didn't have, which is the Spirit of God lives inside of me. God himself has taken up residence within my life and is now the motivating factor. The power of God is at work in my life through the Spirit of God in moving me forward. And I am now an internally, listen, we can say, you can go to a charismatic church all you want and say you're Spirit-led. But it's amazing how many people are not actually Spirit-led, they're externally motivated. That it's not the Spirit of God that's leading them. It's not the Spirit of God that's moving them to take responsibility for their Christian life. See, there's got to be a burden that gets inside of you if you're going to reach a city. God's got to put a burden inside of you through the Spirit of God. It's what I would say is the main difference between, it's what I would call the difference between babysitters and parents. Babysitters and parents, my 15-year-old, she's a great babysitter. She's really good at it. She's got a whole little job she does. Like people have her all the time. But what she needs two things. She needs money and she needs a list of what to do. And she'll do it really well, but she shows up and make sure you feed them, make sure you read them, make sure you read them a book, give them a bath, make sure they get to bed on a certain time, make sure she does the whole list, and then she gets paid and she does it well. The difference though, as a parent, is one, if you're a parent, you're not making money, you're losing money. There's the first one. Let me just say this right now. But anyways, you're not making money as a parent, you're losing money. But the second thing is you don't need a list. Do you know why you don't need a list? Because you have something that the babysitter doesn't have, which is an internal burden called love, right? So that internal burden is now the thing that's pushing you, that's drawing you to say, why do I feed my child? Because I love them. Like love determines what you do then, an internal burden. Why do I feed them and why do I make sure they're clean and why do I make sure they're loved and read books and why do I make sure they get to bed on a certain time? Because love is the thing that is the internal motivation that the babysitter doesn't have, so the babysitter needs money and a list. And we've got to get the church to move away from the babysitter mentality and begin to say in their city, God, that you would put a burden inside of me for my city, that I would drive through my city with a burden of love that begins to say, God, here, like that we begin to cry out. Listen, I don't need anybody, and I can tell you this, I don't need any preacher to get up and fire me up about praying for my kids. I don't need a preacher to give me vision for praying for my kids. I don't need a preacher to fire me up and get me excited about praying for my kids, because I have an internal burden inside of me called love that puts me on my face before God praying for my kids. I need a pastor to teach me. I need a pastor to equip me, like make me a more effective prayer, make me a more effective parent. I need a pastor to encourage me, because it can get tough sometimes, but I don't need them to motivate me. That thing comes from something called love. It puts me on my face. And the church has got to begin to get this thing when they're driving through the city with a burden for their city. That when we call prayer meetings, it's not hard to get people there, because there's a maturity that's come in the church that says we've got to get on our face before God for our city. That we would show up early to our work because we've allowed God to put a burden in our life for that place that I work at, for the neighborhood that I walk in, for the family that I belong to. That we would begin to be internally motivated believers. This is the big one for me, because I'm looking for believers that both carry the burden and then walk in personal responsibility. You say, God, what is it that you've called me to do to reach this city? Can you imagine if every Christian in this city actually just leaned into the Holy Spirit and said, what am I supposed to do to reach this city? What am I supposed to do to disciple people? What am I supposed to do to reach my workplace? What am I supposed to do to reach my sphere of influence? What am I supposed to do to pray? That we would all lean into the Holy Spirit, and that I would stop looking for other people to do my Christian life for me. And I will tell you this, I don't want other people doing my Christian life for me. This is the whole journey. This is the rewarding part of I follow Jesus. I want to lean in and say, God, what's my part in this city? What's my part in this church? What's my part at Thanksgiving? What's my part in this family? Like, what's the part I play? And I don't want my pastor doing it for me. I don't want somebody else doing it for me. I want to do it. And again, the reason why we're talking about family is because family is what begins to require that, and it's weird when you're not doing it. We mentioned Thanksgiving, but what's funny is, again, there's more than just church. We got to think about this in the city. But in church, we ask people to get involved and serve. But not because I'm looking for like a labor force. Not because I'm looking for like workers. Because I just think it's the most natural thing in the world to do as family. And in fact, it's one of the reasons why we're okay if people aren't serving. Because I'm like, listen, figure out if this is your family. And that may take some time. You may come into church for a while and you're not quite sure if this is family yet. But when you figure out if it's family or not, once you figure out it's family, jump in. Because it's the most natural thing. And the reason I say that is because if you've ever been to Thanksgiving, there's a few categories of people that don't serve. One is kids. Right? And I'm not mad at them. I'm not mad at the kids that they're not serving. They're kids. And I say this lovingly, they're immature. It's more about them. And I'm okay with that, right? This is the beautiful thing about family. Nobody's mad at immaturity in family. I'm not mad at my 10-year-old for being 10, right? So, and that's okay, but they're not serving, but the goal is that they would. The goal is that eventually they would mature and take personal responsibility and jump in and for the city and for the family and things like that. But the second group are guests. We have a lot of the nieces and nephews will bring home people from college that couldn't go home. This happened last Thanksgiving. There was 2. And so, they don't serve, but we're okay. We're like, no, not a problem at all. No problem. You don't have to serve. Like, we're here for you. Don't worry about serving. But there's that third category that's a weird category, and it's usually an uncle, and and he sits on the couch and then just randomly just yells for people to bring him stuff and doesn't do anything. Like, that's weird. Right? That's odd. But it's odd in family, not in a restaurant. Are you with me on this? It's odd in family, not in a restaurant. That's why it's odd that we're not leaning in and figuring out how to reach the city, and that I'm not looking for somebody else to live my Christian life and all this type of stuff. It's even why in church, guys, it's, we organize, and I'm an organizer, and I like strategy, and I like structure, and so we have greeter teams, and we have ushers, and we've got all this stuff. But, we've got greeters. Do you realize it's not the greeters, it's not just their responsibility to make sure people feel welcome? Like, if this is a house, do you realize it doesn't matter what your personality is. You can be the most introvert personality, but I promise you, if you have a get-together at your house, there's not a chance somebody walks through that front door and you don't make sure that they're welcomed, greeted, make sure they feel loved, make sure you know people. Can I get your Coke? Can I get you something to drink? Your personality doesn't matter in that moment, right? It's my house, and there's no way you're going to come into my house and not immediately feel welcomed and connected. Even at Thanksgiving, like at Thanksgiving, there's no way. In fact, there was 2 guys at Thanksgiving who were guests, and they were sitting by themselves. And my wife's like, go over there and get them like connected to other people. I'm like, all right. So I go over, I'm like, hey guys, come on. You don't know many people around here. Let me show you some people. Come on. You peel potatoes? Let's do this. And but it's because there's no way that I would ever allow anybody in my house ever to sit on a couch not feeling connected or loved or not knowing anybody else. It's just not going to happen. And when I'm in family, it's not like, well, there's greeters. There's greeters. Somebody's doing that, right? Aren't the greeters going to make sure those people feel connected? No, I'm going to show up every Sunday, and I'm going to look around, and if anybody's sitting by themselves, if anybody looks like they're not connected, if I'm going to grab them. What are you doing? Come on, do you know anybody? Let's go sit over here. Like, because that's family, and I'm going to do that in the city, and I'm going to do that in everywhere I go, because that's what is required from me as a mature believer, as a mature follower of Christ. And I very much think one of the reasons we're not reaching the city is because believers aren't leaning in and just saying, God, what's my part to play? And I'm not looking for somebody else to build that for me. And if my pastor hasn't built something, it doesn't matter. I'm going to lean in anyways. We can have the worship team come. Are you tracking with me on this? Man, I'm just telling you, this is what I dream about. I dream about in cities that believers, and listen, and the immature believers in our midst, which all of us have immaturity in us, right? I have immaturity in me that needs to mature. All of us do. But that we're finding each other, and we're believing in each other, and challenging each other, and maturing each other, because I think that begins to manifest in not only a healthy family where the lost can be brought into, but a family that begins to grow and mature people so they can go reach a city, so they can go fill a city with Jesus. You want to fill a city with Jesus? This city does not need more programs. It needs believers that will actually lean in to what their responsibility is. Like, what's my responsibility?